Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Klara Kopecka. I'm an event specialist at MemSource, and I'm happy to welcome you here today. Thanks for joining us. Today's webinar is co-organized by Gridly and MemSource, and I'm sure there might be some people who perhaps know MemSource but haven't heard of Gridly, or the other way around, or maybe haven't heard of either company. Let me just very briefly introduce the two. So Gridly is a game localization content management system developed by Localize-Direct, and MemSource is an AI-powered translation management system. And today, Gridly and MemSource got together to talk about game localization and especially about the new integration between Gridly and MemSource that will help you make your game localization easier. So who are going to be the speakers today? Representing Gridly, we have Michael Ciuto. Michael is a business development director at Gridly. He has over 20 years of experience in game development and localization. Michael has experience with both internal and external game development teams and has been involved in game development at various points in the process. He's been involved in the production of the Commando series, Time Splitters 2, or Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, just to name a few. So that's Mike. On the MemSource side, we have Jakub Janičkovič, solution architect at MemSource. Jakub has a master's in translation and interpreting, and his previous role at MemSource was the one of a support specialist, where he gained a comprehensive understanding of the challenges faced by translators and project managers. And on top of that, Jakub has extensive experience performing demos and speaking at webinars like the one today. Firstly, we are going to set the scene by discussing the challenges and obstacles that come with game localization, some of which might probably sound familiar to you. And then we are going to present a solution to overcome these challenges with a new Gridly and MemSource integration, which we are going to also demonstrate to you. So just one last thing before I pass it over to Mike. Let me just say that there will be time to answer any of your questions at the end of this webinar. So you can send them in through the Q&A button on your Zoom panel. And last but not least, this webinar is being recorded and everyone will receive the recording automatically tomorrow in their email inboxes. So let's get started with the webinar itself. Mike, over to you.
Thank you very much, Klara. Okay, so I'm going to start off by briefly sharing some of the main lock challenges, what they are, and then we'll talk about what could be done about them. And again, as Klara mentioned, between ourselves, Gridly, and of course, MemSource. So one of the key things that I wanted to point out was missing changes to source text. Then we've got a multi-step localization process. Again, not all games start in English. Then we have tracking frequent updates, which regularly spiral. Then we've got lack of context leading to mistranslations. And then we've got offline files and the headache that is offline files. But we'll just touch on those kind of quite briefly, and then we'll go into a live Gridly and MemSource demo. Ooh, crowd go mad. Right, so missing changes to source text. Right, so again, these things happen. I've experienced this tons of times in the past when I was in development, and obviously tons of times with Localize-Direct. So again, source text is very different when it comes to games, because games are just constantly evolving. And so what will then happen is, maybe through the testing or the feedback phase, stuff's going into the game and then the game's changing, the text is changing as a result of this feedback. So, if those things aren't tracked properly, then you could create these kind of dead-end gameplay kind of scenarios. So for example, there's one here we've got beautifully designed here where we've got blow up X number of zombies, let's say 100 zombies. And then that's then changed to capture 100 zombies. Now, if that isn't then mirrored in the translations, then obviously that person's just going to be wandering the level, kind of just blowing up zombies and not actually capturing any zombies. So there, the game falls over. Now, that could well be a case of, that's a gameplay dead end. Does that player want to then go to some playthrough website and find out how to get through that? Maybe if it's a £60 game, they would probably invest in finding that solution, or reading the board or whatever it might be. But if it's a free-to-play game, they're probably going to just run off and you won't see them again. Then we have multi-step localization. So as I mentioned, source isn't always English. So, regularly starts off Chinese or Brazilian or Spanish or whatever it might be. So managing the source to pivot in itself, if it was like source to target, that in itself is a challenge. But with something robust like Gridly or LockDirect or another tool, then that can be managed. So obviously using Google Sheet or Excel files has its own problems, and we'll come on to that as well. But that pivot control, so if you're going from a source language into that pivot, and then from pivot into global, then there's tons of challenges there, and kind of managing that is a full-time job, and chaos regularly ensues. So you need something robust there that manages those relationships between each of the sources and the eventual targets. Okay, so frequent updates. So lots more games these days are doing the kind of regular releases, regular updates, once a week, sometimes more. And this is kind of regularly termed as like games as a service. And so basically, there's so much content flying through, being translated, that all needs to be managed as well. And again, that can regularly spiral as per Dorothy's house in Wizard of Oz. And so that tracking is absolutely key. Okay, then we have mistranslations, just as a result of just not having enough kind of detail on what's desired from that. And again, something needs to kind of track how that's managed. Now, code is great, and if we can get code as a LSP ourselves as well, if we can get code, wonderful, and then we'll share that, and then people can play that. It's not always possible, of course, if it's kind of top secret stuff, or perhaps maybe the developer simply doesn't want to share it, or it could be a format problem where maybe they don't have the platforms in place to be able to test it. So even if you have code, sometimes having that code and having cheat codes is still very tricky to actually get to the point that you want that the translator needs to get to understand how that string's being used. So basically, screenshots is a regular kind of go-to if we're lucky again. But then those screenshots regularly just live in a big shared file, a big shared folder, and then that shared folder can sometimes be kind of badly kind of organized, and so you end up trying to flick through different screenshots to find exactly the sequence you're looking for. So again, that can be problematic too. And then there's discussion required. So sometimes translators will have questions, and those questions need to be answered as quickly as possible, of course. But what you might then find is that a particular translator may ask a question, and then one of the other translators may not have considered that option, and then suddenly realize, oh, actually, I was mistranslating this, but now as a result of the response received on a particular comment, now I know exactly what's needed, and then make that translation as good as possible. Then we have offline files. Oh, everyone loves offline files. You always kind of think, okay, this is the final draft, and as ex-dev, you kind of say, right, this is it, this is good, and you send it, and then you go to get that translated. Now that's already a day into translation, and then all of a sudden some more things change. And so then it's like, no, this is the final draft. And then that continues to kind of pipe through until you've got version 7, version 11, and it carries on and on. So it's very tricky, especially with games, because games do change and flex right up to the last minute. And especially, as mentioned, with games as a service, obviously those things continue right up until the actual release and the button pressed to populate. So kind of, again, with offline files, it's kind of having the ability to make sure that certain people can only edit certain things. There's a lot of influence that happens with these files. And again, you end up with a real kind of mishmash of information. So single source of truth is needed. So again, we'll go into Gridly in a second, but the idea is that you have lots of different files moving around. Is this the latest one? Was this highlighted in red, but now it's been highlighted in orange? And basically you've got lots and lots of confusion. So single source of truth. Right, which is why we've developed Gridly. Right, so I'm not going to read through all of these, so have no fear, you can read these at your leisure. But basically, it's that single source of truth. It's kind of the ability for Gridly to store all of that content, and it's structured content as well. So it's not just necessarily just strings themselves and then the translations of those strings. It can be used to store data on how much something costs, or the difficulty levels of a particular mission, or of a particular character, and all of that can be managed from there as well. So you would just create different grids for each of these types of values, or indeed kind of have them all on a massive spreadsheet, which you then only share certain parts of that spreadsheet. Again, that's extremely important to allow that kind of granular responsibility flow as well. So we have our multi-language support, of course, as you would expect. One of the key things is dependencies, and that's how we're able to then manage the pivoting as well, which again, we'll cover in the demo. And I think that people will like the fact that, it's familiar, it's recognizable, there's a spreadsheet interface there. So it doesn't immediately kind of just form just big kind of like blocks of things that are kind of confusing. So, we need to make sure that it's suitable for technical and non-technical users. And then, of course, we have a very powerful API, and then various add-ons. One of them, of course, being this MemSource add-on, and more will kind of appear over time, like the Unreal and Unity and stuff like that as well. Okie dokie, right. So let's switch over. I'm hoping that everyone can hear this and and is able to follow, because there's no kind of feedback. Okay, so here we have Gridly. So for existing users, they will be familiar, existing Gridly users, so they've seen this before. But for those of you who haven't, so this is the spreadsheet-like interface that I mentioned before. For those of you that aren't familiar, this shouldn't be a kind of a massive hurdle, but of course contains all that powerful functionality that helps you track those dependencies and all the data that you have within your project. So what we can do here is, again, the nice familiar thing here is the fact that you may well already be working on a Google Sheet, or you may be working in an Excel file. So you can recreate the structure you have within that Excel file or the Google Sheet within Gridly as well. But then you'll have all those other benefits that come off the back of that as well. So just to introduce here, so spreadsheet, we've got a product name. We can also associate imagery as well. So I can click on that. There's pictures in here too. And then we've got our Spanish to English here. And as we scroll across, we've got a bunch of other things as well in here, which I'll come on to briefly. At the top here, you can structure different views, which I will expand on shortly. In this particular view, we can then affect what's then seen within this subset of the main view. So we can kind of manage columns, and we can choose what data should be viewable and which ones are editable. We can then change any kind of filters, and we can add filters. So basically, whoever is assigned this view will then be able to see exactly what you set up here. And then there's a particular sort that you want to have in here, and then path tag as well, which works in a way like folders would as well. So you can drag and drop certain records into folders to then just kind of structure your grid in the right way. Okay, so of absolute importance is dependencies, of course. So if I click on here, we've got our Spanish to target US English, so source to target. Nice and easy, job done. What you can also do is you can associate other types of data as well. So I've got my English, there's nothing translated there at the moment. But you can associate some audio. For example, I've got this English audio column here. So I can then say, actually, if there's changes in English, then I want to make a dependency of the English audio here. So we'll see here as we scroll across, you can see we have this English audio, and these are now up to date. So these are green. Scroll back, you see that those are up to date. So then we'll wait for this text to go in, which I'm sure will then flag it as it being out. Okay, so here we have explota 100 zombies para completar la misión. Right, so this is our source. So I want to explain at this point about the API. So what we currently have is we have the ability to push any text that you have or any data you have into a live environment if you want, or a test environment, which is what we probably recommend more often than not. Let's test it before it actually goes live. So you can do that, and you can set it up to run in real time if you wish, or you can choose to auto-populate whenever a change is made, or you can choose to trigger it at certain points. Maybe you want to do it once a day, or on a button, or actually kind of manual button press. So that's under your control. It doesn't just freely fetch backwards and forwards. Okay, so what we've done is we've set up a website here. Just scroll across here. Okay, so we've created this little kind of live environment here where we can populate it with content. If I scroll across here, you can see we've got stuff like product labels and things like this. So you can change, if I wanted to change wow up here, I can then choose sale, and then it'll add sale to this as well. Sale, wow, there we go. So we can do things like that. We can populate those on the fly. So if I go back over here, we have our Spanish, this is robot yellow, and then we've got this Scotland 100 something. So we've got here, so if we change that to capture, maybe there's an R on the end. Sorry, I think it's an R on the end. Right, so we've got this now. So this now then changes text from here down to here. So we can see that on the fly. Now what we'll do once we populate the English, which is empty at the moment, you can see there's no text here. Then you'll see that this will then populate within the website as well. Okay, so what we'll do here, we've done that. And so what we'll do now is we'll talk about the pivot now. So if I change my view here, select my pivot view, you'll then see it's similar kind of stuff. We've got our text here. So what we'll do here, before I've got, so this is text. Here. So you can see here that this is now currently up to date. If I then change this to export, okay, we can see that this is now currently flagged as out of date. Now that's all good, but what I want to do is I want to set up another target here. So I need to change this target in my dependencies. I'm going to change. I'm going to add. Sorry, I'm going to. Excuse me. I'm going to change this, format this column. So this is now a source language. So this will then go from here. This also treats this as a target because the dependency is still here from Spanish to English. But what I'll do here is I will then associate dependency between English and Swedish. As we saw from here, we've got our 3 languages up here. So we'll show you in a second. So what I'll have is my dependency, and then I will select from English to Swedish. Okie dokie. So you can see here that these are all currently unset. They require translation. Okay, so this is how we then pivot here. Okay, so what we have here is then we waterfall this through. So if I then change, so this is now changed to this is text. If I then change this to again, this is now green. Then if I add text here, you see this is now up to date. So if I then push this through, flags this is out of date. This is now up to date here, which then flags this is out of date. So the whole kind of point, again, you know, this kind of central source of truth, then completely applies here. So as everything kind of waterfalls down, obviously this is just Swedish, but this could certainly be 15, 20, whatever, however many languages. It will then flag all of those languages as being out of date as well. So it will then filter all the way through. Okay, so that's our waterfall there. Now, this tracking frequent updates that I mentioned before, this is all tracked in real time. So nothing goes missing, which is absolutely vital, of course. And then we have our different statuses as well. So it's very clear. You can see here, you can also filter on types of, on the status itself as well. So you can choose whether or not something's up to date or unset, or indeed empty or filled. So again, so it's very simple for someone to kind of see what's in there. You can also use things like we have quick filters here as well, which allow you to kind of to then be able to filter down those strings that just have that text, for example. Okay, right. So what we can also do is we can then, because there's, you know, you're probably going to have quite a lot of data in here, and then you might want to select only certain things that you want to send for translation, etc., because you may well have things that aren't quite ready to be translated yet. You can then just simply create another column, for example, this one here called ready for translation. So you can then choose whether or not to change these for a yes, no. So there's lots of different types of columns that you can create. If I just create a quick column here, we can then choose, I'll just call it column that. And then we've got all these different types of data that we can create as well. So you can go as far down as having JSON YAML files. So yes, a Boolean is the one that we created previously. So we'll just leave that alone as it is. Right, okay, so we'll scroll back here. Okay, and then, so you might want to have, maybe there's an additional column which might be a platform-specific column. It could be something like an approved column, something like that. So you may well have a step in the process, which is before anything goes out for translation, it must have a tick in this box that somebody's verified this is good to go. And then that can then get pushed to Memsource or translated, if you wish. Okay, so lack of context, that was also a biggie too. Right, so if I go to my translator view here, so translator view, so again, so as I showed before, we've got stuff like description here. So we have a description column, lovely. If we get that kind of information, it's super useful. I can only recommend that whenever possible, please do try to send it. It will make your lives easier because then you won't be asked so many questions, fingers crossed. So yes, it's really important to kind of try to get that description text in there. But of course, as we showed before, there's attaching imagery, attaching WAVs. We've got stuff like, we've got this one here.
Blow up 100 zombies to complete the mission.
Which is the translation of this over here. So yes, you can have all of that stuff in here as well and preview it all within the system too. Okay, so I should explain here that we have our translator view. So this is a view that I've created, which is purely that allows a certain amount of access to certain columns, and you can then choose whether or not editable or visible, as I showed you before. So this particular one here, we've got the product name, we've got image, but you can see here that these are not editable, but they can see them. So the only thing that can actually be changed is the English target, which is what we want them to do. So if I then add, so you can see here, there's a little icon, which is read only as well. So the translations can go in directly here. Absolutely no problem. And then of course that flags that as up to date as well. Now, again, like I mentioned before, it's kind of, this is now a subset of the totality of the grid itself. So you can see there's far fewer columns than there were in the other views that I had, because sometimes there's just data that doesn't need to be shared, or there could be top secret stuff that you don't want to share. So that's another thing as well. Now, one of the things that translators can do as well is they can right click on something and add a comment. So you can do, a really good one on there, this one. So you can have the, what does this mean? Enter. And so that now appears here. So like I mentioned before, all the translators can see this, or the lock managers involved in controlling this process, and then things can be then resolved. Now you can then click, you can edit that, of course. You can also, at the top right-hand corner here, there's actually a comments overview. So I've just, so this one here is currently open, so you can select that, and then you can then see the other values that are available for you for the translator in that view to be able to see, whether there's max text length, etc. And then those changes can actually be made, the changes can be made within this panel as well. And then once everything is good, that can be resolved, and then that's the end of that. Okie dokie, right. Okay, so again, it's that whole kind of, we want something really collaborative with our current Lock Direct. We found that that's been, a real benefit to so many, because there is that collaboration in there as well. So it's really important that everyone kind of understands exactly where everything is at that point. Okay, right. So offline files and human error. Right. Okay. So if I go to the stream view here. So these are now my 12 strings. This is an enormous project. I'm sure that you'll be absolutely disappointed if that crossed your door. But right, so we have our 12 strings here. This again, the single source of truth. So what we're going to do is we're going to push this to memsource, which makes the process even sweeter. And I'll show you kind of like a nice little function. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these so that they don't form part of the push that we're going to do. What I'm going to do as well, extremely important, and I'm including this because it was a request from Ramon. You know who you are. Welcome, welcome. So branching. So I'm going to create a new branch here, and I'm going to call it lock pass, and save that. So, the basic premise behind branching is that allowing you to then create kind of like a splinter, or a branch indeed, that allows you to then kind of edit to your heart's desire, maybe do a lock pass, maybe whatever it is, split that out, and then merge it back in afterwards, and obviously review those changes before they go in. Again, kind of making sure, you may have a number of different branches that may be live at any one point, so you can merge those back in. So again, extremely important. And certainly, if somebody really wants to know more about branching, then happily we can arrange something up. So yes, so then we have our translation overview. So we have our lock pass. This is currently lock pass. If I look at master, you can see that there's they clearly change. Right, so we have our translation overview here. If I select that, this gives us, whether something's out of date, or unset. And so we have 12 total records, 12 aren't completed, and it's 107 words. A princely project. Right, okay, so and then you see down here that with the Swedish, the word count isn't yet available because there's nothing there yet for it to calculate. And you can also look at this as well as in terms of percentage as well. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, and then the way we push and the way we export as well, if you wanted to create an export file, is that it's whatever's within that particular view at that point. So you would then use the filters to then, if you only wanted to select certain ones, you could then use the filters to then only select those that contain a certain value. Great. Okay. Right. So yeah, so we use those filters, and then the connection to MemSource itself, I should point out, is super fast. And I think, we've not really had a championship recently, but it's kind of around 40 seconds or so. And basically, you add some information into MemSource, it then asks for validation back, and then you're off and running. Super simple. So that's actually very simple to do. So we have this rather lovely looking MemSource button over here, which I should select, and then we have our push to MemSource. Okay, so if I select that, I'm going to create a new project, and you can create projects from templates from within MemSource. And then I'm going to select this one, which is Spanish source. You can see here that this is also grayed out here because it shows that there's more than one source language, but this source language, which is that pivot language, isn't supported in this particular template. So that it kind of removes that potential for error. Oh, I'll select the English. Oh no, what's happened? So you select source language, then we've got our target. At the moment, it's just the English pivot. And then I'll push. Oh, yeah, okay. So then we can then push. Right, let's try this again. Okay. That's just being stupid. Robo test database, let's call it that. Then we have this, and we'll have product name, and then we'll have desk, and then we'll have maximum length. So yeah, so we've got this additional detail, additional information to then pass on to the translation team. And then we'll push this. Oh, actually, before I push this, the way it's set up, and I hand over to Jakob in a bit, is he'll then explain how this happens. But it will, within MemSource, when a particular job has been accepted and then confirmed and then completed, then it will then automatically push those translations back. And this particular step that I'll show you is purely one that's set up with machine translation. And then obviously then you may well have second step, third step, fourth step, whatever. So you will see this text populate, and then we'll see it within the website. Okay, so again, this is kind of a useful thing. Again, from a development perspective, it would have been super handy to have had this kind of functionality way back then, because it just allows then you to kind of have a look at some of the text that's already been translated, and then you can kind of review, make sure the stuff fits on screen, make sure it's not overlong. There's so many benefits as a result of that. Okay, so I'm going to click on push here. Okay, right. So what we should then find, so if I scroll across, this is now populated here. Huzzah! And if we go over here, we'll see that this is the Spanish. Click over to the English, and you see that it doesn't work. Why is this not working? Okay. Maybe I need to talk about that. That's very strange. Okay, that will highlight in a minute. Not super important. I shall check that out in a minute. I'll do it when I swap over. Anyway, the important thing is to show that it populates here within Gridly. And then what we'll do now is then we'll push the text from Gridly. We'll see here, we'll look at our translation over. Oh, sorry, aha! I know why. I've forgotten a rather important step. So this is a branch, and we've not set it up to populate from the branch. So what we'll do here is we will then choose our lock path here. We've got our version control, and then we'll merge branch here. So we merge branch from lock path to master. We can then view the changes here. So here we have our changes. We can see what's been added here. This is all added. Fantastic. We're happy with that. It's only 12 strings. I think we've got this under control. And then we can then choose which option we'd like. So we'd like to add and update the master branch. So then we click on merge. Are you sure? Yes, indeed. Now, when we go back to master up here, we'll then see this now appears here. Don't worry, everyone. It's all under control. Right. So yes, we have that there. So it's exactly what we wanted to see. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to push the English for Swedish translation. So what I'll do here is, again, I'll do actually, I'll look at the overview here first. And then you'll see here that the English is all now beautifully up to date. Then we'll push MemSource, select, and we'll create a new project here. And we'll use the English template here. For EN test database. And then we go from English. Again, this is grayed out because this is not supported in this template. And Swedish, and then push again. Product name, desk, and maximum length. Push. And that should now go over to Jakob. Right. Okay. So we merged that back in. That's all good. Now it's over to Jakob, and I shall hand over to him now. Are you ready, Jakob?
Yes. As much as I'll ever be. Okay. So let me start sharing my part. So, and I'm starting to share here just so you understand what happened on the background while Mike was pushing the content back and forth, and while the machine translation appeared, the other project being created. So, like you saw in the integration part or in the push part, what Mike was actually fetching was MemSource project templates, and that's beneficial in the sense that it will set up the projects in the way you want them to be set up, right? So these templates contain the import settings, then contain the translation memories, term bases, because in the end, MemSource is like Clara already mentioned in the beginning, fully fledged translation management system, right? It's full-fledged TMS, translation memories, term bases, all of that is there. So why not use it if you already have them there? So your terminology is stored, your past translations are there as well. But what happened here for Mike, the way we have set it up, just to kind of have it auto-populated for the pivot purposes, we had the automated translation happen. So basically, as what we call jobs here, these translatable files went into MemSource, they were automatically populated with machine translation. In this case, we had MemSource translate selected. So we had some engine selected on the background, which was best for the content. And it was pre-populated and immediately delivered back to Mike. This was how this particular project template was set up, because we wanted to have English back right away, so we can push it for QA. We could have some review done on the English while the actual translations are still happening, while they are being reviewed, and so on and so forth. The second project that got created is the actual English to Swedish, so the actual translation plus revision project, which we would eventually go and actually translate. And this one, since it's not being done automatically, is going to go through the standard project management. So there are various features on project management that could help and that MemSource provides. One of those being the project metadata, because you would be translating various types of games, franchises, releases of those franchises. So it's important to distinguish between them. So here, I picked up Doom as my game of choice. So we have the client to be set up for the game we want to work on. And that's the metadata level, right? So you set it up on the project level. So every project that's related to Doom will have the client called Doom. So it could be any of those releases, bug fixes that you're going to release. You'll have that overarching client called Doom. But let's say you want to split further, right? You have as you all know, gaming industry, there's been a lot of Doom games. So the latest one, Doom Eternal, is set up as the domain, right? So we are branching out from the client to the domain of the project, which is now being the game expansion or the game itself, not the franchise overall. And then we have, or I have set up the subdomain to be the platform, let's say, that we want to translate this for. Maybe we have a different translations for different platforms, especially for like stores. And then the cost center being the release, right? And the main reason I'm mentioning the metadata is twofold. One is project management or categorization, right? You want to be able to easily find all the project for Doom, all the projects related to release 4.5. All of this is filterable, searchable, and you can easily find all of this. But the second reason is all the information that you actually do in MemSource, including the metadata, is being indexed on our end. So we are storing the information, how many projects you created for specific languages, volumes that you created or translated by franchise, release. All of that is being stored and tracked. So if you want to report on those sometime later on, for whatever reason, you have that information in MemSource. My bad joke, it's been a year, but my bad joke is, if COVID 2.0 hits, you need to cut costs. You can figure out which game is the most expensive one, why, and maybe not localize it. Or vice versa, cut the ones that you spend little money on and they don't do so well. So the data is being stored on the background as well. The other features, of course, except for the let's say the metadata and reporting, the project management, there is the fully fledged CAT tool, right? So we have what we call job here, so the content uploaded directly, and you can see some things being added here. So just to explain what you see, right? So I had the content auto-populated from machine translation, as well as I did with the Spanish to English, but I also do have some translation memory matches here. So they are not perfect because we had the machine translation there, and there are different results than we have in the TM. But so that the source is a little bit different than what I have here. But you can see that there is translation memory attached, multiple results being shown for various types of translations we had. There is also term-based entries, so you can manage and make sure that terminology is being constantly used. So the yellow ones are terms that should be used in this context. The red ones, red is always good. So that's something that shouldn't be used in case there are, forbidden words that you shouldn't be using for specific target languages, because again, it's a glossary, so it's language based. So if you are allowed to use certain terms in Spanish, but not in German, sure, you'll have the term basis set up that way. And then of course we have the machine translation part. For those of you peeking, you may have noticed that I intentionally switched to this context view, because that's the information that Mike pushed to me for the maximum length, the description, which we call a note, so any additional information to the translators, and also the key. The key is the key, no pun intended, because that key that you push into MemSource can be used as the context identifier, right? So when you are managing your translation memories and you're storing your translations, what you're storing with them is the context information. And the usual kind of context you can have for like Word files is previous and next. So you look at the surrounding segments and you decide based on what's there, where things should be translated in a certain way. But with strings like these, game localization, software in general, the developers like to play, delete stuff, move stuff, and suddenly the environment is different. So you can use the key, the unique identifier for that specific row that Mike showed in Gridly, or the key from iOS strings or anything basically that you need, will be the thing that will determine where you have the 101 in context match. And anytime that key with that specific segment appears together, that's what will determine the 101% match. And regardless of where it appears. So if I switched or shifted this string somewhere else, it would still show up as 101. It doesn't matter what would be the surrounding segments. The context note, that's just, as Mike set it up to be the description. So these could be the notes to the translators, explaining certain things, how they should be done. And of course, we have the max length. So let's see if we have some short one. So if the translator translates and they reach a certain point and they exceed the target length, it will show them even a visual indicator that, now we are over line, maybe shorten this up a little bit, because This can prevent the very first problem when the strings go back and they are too long. If you have the information about the character limitations, that's already being shown to them. However, maybe you don't see this, maybe you copy paste text and move along. So the next best thing for not just target limitations, but also overall quality is the quality assurance. So in the projects in MemSource, you can set up a range of quality assurance checks that the translators need to perform, or they can be forced to perform in order to deliver the translations back, right? So these would include missing terminology, as you can see here, unedited fuzzy matches, right? So they have taken a fuzzy match, meaning 99 to 0% match, so a similar match, and they didn't edit it, they kept it there. So maybe that's wrong, right? So it's a different thing that than you had. Or of course, other errors like exceeding maximum length and so on and so forth. And they either need to fix them, right? So make sure that they make right, or they can ignore them, right? So if there is something that they are aware and they don't want to use it intentionally, they can ignore the warnings. But all of that is tracked because MemSource, as a cloud-based tool, everything that happens in real time. But not only it happens in real time here for me, it happens in real time for everyone who has access to the same thing. Because when I mention everyone has access to this, or why I'm mentioning it, when working in MemSource, you can collaborate with internal users, as I like to call them, or external. Internal users, those would be any users you create yourself. These would be your linguist accounts, your translator accounts, your guests that you can invite, the VP of marketing to check on a PowerPoint in MemSource to proofread, for example. The submitter accounts, if you need to provide your engineers with a quick portal, if they need to maybe have machine translated some documentation. So you can give them a portal, they drag and drop strings there, it crunches through MT and delivers that back so they can continue working without bothering anyone, right? Or without using Google Translate somewhere in the UI, they can actually leverage your translation memories and term bases during that translation process. So again, if there are strings that they have done in the past, there can be an interface that they access, they request translations from your past database, just to see if that has been done, how that was translated in the last version of the game, and continue with the QA, maybe. So there are various roles, but all of these are what I call internal because you manage them in here, right? The person in this Eric admin, that's the person managing them, disabling them, creating the accounts. That's why I call them internal. The other part is the external, right? So there is a concept of sharing through these vendor tokens. And that's a way to link any number of MemSource accounts together. So you can create a vendor supply chain, right? So a good example would be you give German language to a huge translation agency, let's say Moravia, right? So you give the translation job to Moravia, and then you're just waiting for it to be done. But what can then happen for Moravia is they can subcontract it to smaller LSP, that smaller LSP can go to smaller LSP. So you can create a chain like this through the means of vendor token by linking the MemSource accounts together. But the beauty of this is that you don't have to know that this is happening, but anything you do and all that happens, regardless of who does it, it's visible to you, right? So if the vendor's linguist asks a question, you can answer, even without knowing who they are. You can answer, and they will be able to get on with their work. Everything happens in one centralized environment. But also through this sharing, you're forcing every single party in the supply chain to use the resources, terminology, translation memory, everything that you have set up. So if you have terminology created, everyone in the chain is forced to use it. If you have translation memory set up, everyone who translates for you is automatically updating that translation memory. So technically, vendor number 1 is populating results for vendor number 2 and so on, because you are the central point with the translation memory, and everyone else is just populating it, and the other people are reusing those matches, because in the end, these are your matches. But also, that's why I mentioned the QA, that and the settings, making sure no one hands over anything with issues, that's also enforced in this shared scenario. So whatever you have set up, everyone that will be involved in the supply chain will be forced to obey that. But also, coming to the end of my part, if everything goes smoothly, you translate, you review, the entire MemSource management and the entire process in MemSource happens, what is important for the integration with Gridly is you finish the job, right? The work has been completed. We have went through it. We translated. We did our part. So by marking the step to be finished, marking the job as completed, that indicates to Gridly to pull the translations, which should now be back with Mike, and back to you, Mike, so to show my results.
Thank you very much. So I was laughing, I forgot it wasn't turned on. Right, so I'm just going to share my screen again. Let's see these results in all their beauty. Okay, so here we have our grid. And scroll across, and we've got Swedish, and look, it's appeared here as well. Now, ideally, I would have shown you it live, bosh, in there, and then because you're like, nah, that didn't really happen, no. But it did. Honestly, I suppose I could change something here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just scroll back over here, and then I'm going to just change this one again. Okay, so now let's flag this as out of date. I'm going to change this to 300. I'm going to change this to. Okay, right. So I'm going to change those now, and these are now both out of date. I'm going to push these quickly into MemSource, into the end. So existing project. We find our project. So this is our this one here. And so we're getting Spanish to English. Again, we'll push the stuff we were pushing before again. And then that's the length. Push. Okay, so that's now going up to Jakob. And he'll do his magic. I should point out as well that I didn't even realize that you were doing Doom. So I've got my Doom t-shirt on. Who knew? Right, okay, so those should, once Jakob's finished, should push those back. Remember, you need to do the second project. Because every time you send a request into MemSource, whenever you push into MemSource, then it will create a new job within that project. So that should appear any second now. Look, come on, hurry up! Yeah.
I'm making sure I put something silly there so people believe that actually happened.
Oh, okay.
You made me think of that.
So something Doom related. Something about the Romeros. Something about Carmack. All right, so if I then go back to the English over here, just to proof this happened. There we go. You see, magical stuff. Thank you so much. Wonderful. So yeah, so what would happen? That would update as well, but we don't need to show that as well. But yeah, as you can see, it didn't require any refresh. Just automatically comes in. So this is our source of truth. I think that kind of brings us to the end of our demo. So that's the demo portion of the webinar. We do hope you can see how Gridly can remove a great number of the regular log problems that we've always found, especially with game dev processes. Then if you go one step further, you can see that Gridly, combined with MemSource, really then speeds everything up dramatically. And there's additional benefits from using the tool as well. Gridly Pro is free for a month at the moment, so please do try it out. And then I think we're going to open up to any questions and comments. I think we've been answering a few as we've been going through. And of course, any positive reviews are absolutely graciously welcome. And I shall stop sharing.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Jakob. I saw that you have covered some of the questions, Mike, already in writing. So let's try to cover the rest in the next 10 minutes. So let me read out the first one. Hello, Michael. Have you guys considered adding 2 levels of dependencies? For example, a strong dependency would be set up between the source text and the target text, but a weak dependency could be set up between a different field and the translations.
It's a very interesting question. So it's a great idea. I think there's definitely could be use in there. Thank you, Adolfo, for that. How are you keeping? Everything good? Yeah, so basically, yes, it sounds interesting and certainly something we can take back to the team and have a think about.
Okay, thank you. Next one, for branching, are associated MemSource projects branch specific, or can you have multiple branches in a single MemSource project as well?
I think that one's for Jakob.
Jakob, are you with us?
Yeah, sorry, muted. Yeah, I know. Yeah, so this really depends on how it's pushed from Gridly when you're selecting, existing or a new project. So if you're pushing all the branches into a single project, sure, you can have one, or you can keep branch specific projects.
Lovely, thank you. Another one on MemSource, I think. How about being able to update the MemSource TM with the latest Gridly content at the same time that we are pushing translatable strings to MemSource? Yeah, so the content is being pushed as multilingual. So the things from Gridly are actually being pushed to MemSource. We intentionally didn't show it, right? So they were empty and they were auto-populated. But if there is a content in the target language, it's being pushed to MemSource. It's being pushed as multilingual. So if there is a string in the text that's being pushed into MemSource, you can use that to update the TM, because maybe you don't want to push it directly to the TM, right? You want to do some review before you commit it. So you get the strings into a job, you review the job, and then on that step you decide if you want to save it into the TM or not. But yeah, it's definitely possible. It's coming multilingually. Okay, thank you. Next one, how does the merge work if the source language in logpass is behind the source language in the master? In this demo, only new translations were added.
For me, is next. Okay, so it will match with the older version of the source strings stored in the master. So it will still be yellow, it will still figure as out of date because we branched from that original one. But again, if that person wants to come back to me and we can discuss that further, then please do. But yeah, so it'll match with the older version of the source string stored in the master.
Okay, thank you. Can you add a font manager for Gridly, allowing you to manage fonts for different languages and preview text fields using game fonts?
I like it. It's a good idea. We've actually got. I'm not going to show it today because I'm slightly loath to try something new. But certainly we've got a grid set up where we can actually have screenshots within them, and you can then have the screenshot in there, and then you can overlay that with the text that's been created. So you can then generate that screenshot and then push that screenshot out. So you can. So like I say, it's not just strings, it's all kinds of, not just localizing from one to another. You can also have dependencies based on the language and also any associated screenshots. And then within a little bit of scripting, we can then choose where you want that to be positioned on that screenshot. And that's pretty tremendous, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, so that's the answer on that one.
Thank you. Now, question for Jakob. Is there a way to notify the project manager that there are questions in a project?
Not at the moment. You would have to check the jobs, but that's a feature plan for later this year when we are introducing mentions and notifications. So it's going to come. It's on the way.
Great to hear. Thank you. Another one, does maximum length rely on manually entering in a number value, or can you preset certain length? For example, for button text.
Yes, you can. I mean, the thing is, you could certainly use the you can certainly use like a quick filter to then find all of the particular strings that may feature in a certain location, if that's the kind of naming convention you're using for your strings. So you can say anything that has top quarter underscore blah blah blah, whatever it is, anything that sits in there then can have that value associated to it. But certainly it's a manual kind of entry, because we can't then tell how many characters we could kind of calculate how many characters are on screen in that particular string, and maybe potentially estimate how much more it could hold. But then we don't know if it has the function to scale. We don't know if it has the function to scroll. So I think it's at the moment I don't have a hard and fast answer on that, apart from it's certainly something we would like to do, because obviously if we can do something that then removes that manual step, then I think a lot of devs are going to be super happy with that. But at the moment we are relying on the developer, the publisher, whoever's kind of involved to actually enter that manually.
Thank you. And perhaps one last question. Would a Gridly+Memsource setup permit synchronization per entered line so that translators can check their translations in-game directly without having to submit the full job?
Yes, because you could certainly you could have it set up so that if the translator has access to the development, the test environment, then certainly if it's set up that way so that it automatically populates, then 100%. That's one of the kind of great things, and one of the things that we really want to see happen is people sharing test environments, translators and LQA people fixing those things, and then seeing the fruits of their labor appearing in the game itself. That's ultimate streamline. So yeah, of course we would love to see that, and totally you can do that. But I've shown this website kind of interface API calling, but certainly that was for an ease of use side of things. Certainly, I mean the kind of the real game here is to show it in the game itself, and so you can potentially have a translator sitting next to a QA person, and the QA person's flying through the game itself, and the translator or the LQA person can be watching that game from their setup and then making changes on the fly there. Again, it's that kind of total streamlining, which is what we're all about.
Thank you very much, Mike. I think this is unfortunately all that we can cover today. Mike, maybe can you switch to the slide where we are showing the email addresses so that people know how to contact us?
I missed the page there. I do apologize. There was a nice page before that. Sorry, I was too overwhelmed by all the lovely questions. So I missed that. So can I just very quickly just jump in? There was somebody asked about memo queue as well, and that's on the way as well. So I just wanted to get people kind of like, well, what about memo queue? It's like, hey, this is the MemSource thing. Do you mind? So that's on its way as well.
Great, thank you. So there are a few questions that we haven't managed to answer, but we will get back to you in writing. And this is it from us today. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jakub. For everybody attending, you will receive a recording tomorrow. And if you have a minute now, there will be a short survey popping up after we close this session. So please let us know your feedback. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Bye-bye, everybody.